We just had a pretty strong space weather impact. The interplanetary magnetic field went up to 40 nanotesla. This is 8 times stronger than average. This gave us a G2 geomagnetic storm. That was yesterday. In fact, we're still in a period of heightened geomagnetic volatility at this moment in time. We have this very large, giant, gargantuan coronal hole on the sun right now, emitting a high-speed stream. That's going to sweep by the Earth in about a week or so, and that is very likely to give us a pretty big geomagnetic shakeup as well. But in less than 24 hours, we have another solar storm coming in that has been forecasted to give us a G3 geomagnetic storm, whereas we just had a G2 geomagnetic storm. We just had equinox. That was on the 20th, and I mentioned that because around equinox season, whether this is in March or whether this is September, you have a greater response of the Earth to these solar storm influences because there's greater energy volatility on the planet for a variety of reasons, because of how the light radiation is sweeping across the globe differently. For example, in March, Canada is going to get like 60 more minutes of light, and then the equivalent latitude in the southern hemisphere will lose that much light radiation in the month of March. And so you have these really big swings in light radiation coming in. That just creates a more unstable global electric circuit. Slightly, not to a big degree, but still more unstable than it is during solstice. And specifically, this is in the ionosphere, our gateway, our boundary, our conduit between what's happening closer to the surface in the lithosphere, the crust, in the troposphere, our weather, and even in the stratosphere, and what's happening out in space with the radiation belts, the magnetic field, the magnetopause, the solar wind, and more. So right now, the ionosphere is more stable. It just got loaded with a bunch of energy from this G2 storm that we just had. And now we have a new solar storm coming in less than 24 hours that is expected to give us a G3 geomagnetic storm. I made a forecast that we would have a severe geomagnetic disturbance or something like that. Some sort of space weather intensity or just energetic volatility on the planet going from March 23rd to the 25th based on planetary geometry. This is work that was pioneered by J.H. Nelson back in the 50s and in the 60s. And I made that forecast back on March 2nd. I released a video on it. Lo and behold, here we are. No one else, I'm sure, made that forecast like I did. So one in the books. Don't want to toot my own horn too much, but the point of me saying that is that there is something to this science of looking at beyond just the sun and beyond just what's happening here on the Earth, but also including things, the other celestials in our solar system, the planets, and more. So we're going to discuss all that. Also, according to some different Vedic astrologers, Kali Yuga ended on the 21st of March, so just yesterday. This is the cycle of the 24,000 year cycle of consciousness according to Hinduism and Vedic, like the Vedic belief system and culture going back thousands and thousands of years. Here we have our 304 angstrom view of the sun, and we'll see quite a lot happen. Just kind of getting situated in time here. But the most recent one, we had that one just recently. But you'll see a plasma filament launch off there, that one. That's the one that was from the eastern side of the sun, but showed up going to the west on the coronagraph. We'll look at the coronagraph. And then we have this most recent one, which just blasted off at the very end. There it is. And so we have a lot happening on the sun. We had a 1.2 M-class flare. So this is what the NOAA forecast is showing right there. Really big extension down North America. And we see that here. It's pushing down again for South America, the very southern tip. They'll likely get some aurora. Australia and New Zealand could get aurora as well. We see this increased plasma density sweeping by. We see that on the north-south plane. It's sweeping right by. This is basically a surefire thing. Let us look at the coronagraph imagery because that is the next step in this whole equation. So we go to our coronagraph and we'll also see our mystery object looking at our coronagraph. So let us check it out. Here we have our coronagraph, and we'll see this first coronal mass. See that full halo that launches off right there? That's what's headed our way. And you notice it's a pretty high velocity too. So that's coming our way pretty quickly. And then you'll notice some other stuff happening up here. One of these being from a most recent, that coronal mass ejection that we saw on the 304 angstrom view. That's going up like this. That's not going to interact with us according to the coronagraph. If you're really astute, you'll see something here. You'll see an object traveling across the coronagraph this way that is not a star, because these are all moving at the same speed. But you'll notice this guy right there moving faster. A lot of people have seen this before. They think it's some sort of alien spaceship or something because it shows up fairly dim, and sometimes it goes like this and other times it's going like that, and it's just kind of cutting across at weird angles. Well, this in fact is the planet Mercury. It's doing an inferior conjunction right now. So we're actually seeing Mercury in our coronagraph sweep in front of the sun. Venus is doing its inferior conjunction today, right now, as I'm making this video. But Venus isn't showing up on the coronagraph because she's actually just right up above the field of view. Her inclination has her just outside of the coronagraph view. So she's doing her inferior conjunction. She's up here north of the ecliptic plane. Mercury's also north of the ecliptic plane, but still in view, and it'll be doing its inferior conjunction. It's Mercury-Cazimi. It'll be doing that on the 24th, I believe. And it's this planetary geometry that, according to J.H. Nelson, can create these sort of disturbances. Whether this is working with the sun, whether it's because it also creates geophysical disturbances on Earth directly, or both, and or other, right? There could be some other methods that contribute to geomagnetic disturbances that we aren't aware of as it relates to planetary geometry. But that is all at play right now. Let me pull up that graphic here, the planetary geometry, because this is what I made a video on back on March 2nd. And I just read the book by J.H. Nelson. So if I read it sooner, I would have made the forecast for that sooner. He made forecasts going months in advance, and he was accurate with them. So there's something to this, but let us resize this right here. And here's our heliocentric chart. So we're basically just looking at the angles between the planets with the sun in the center, okay? That's all this is. This isn't anything else than that. I'm not going to go into archetypal astrology or anything like that. This is simply just looking at the angles that exist between the planets in the solar system. And based on this planetary geometry, from the work of J.H. Nelson, this alignment here is very, very, very likely to result in some sort of severe geomagnetic disturbance. And now he specifically worked in terms of communication going from US to Europe back in the 40s and 50s with shortwave radio. And so they needed to know whether the radio was going to work or not. And that's all based on the ionosphere, being able to reflect waves off the ionosphere. And you get the ionosphere to change when you have ion precipitation from a solar storm impact, also from a variety of things. You have greater ionospheric volatility during solar maximum, but also greater propagation because it is stronger. And then also things like the equinox and solstices affect this. So when you have all these different factors combined, then you can look at things and be like, okay, we got something happening. So we have all the inner planets here grouped together because at this moment in time, Mercury, Venus, and Earth are all in a perfect line with the sun. On the other side, we have Saturn and Neptune. And then we have Pluto and Uranus trying to each other, trying to the inner planets like this. Jupiter square to both of these opposition groups. So really incredible planetary geometry right now. You don't get this every day. And the very interesting thing about this, the super interesting thing about this is that we have this planetary geometry basically right now as Venus goes Cazimi and basically starts a new part of her Venus star cycle. She makes a really interesting pattern through the cosmos based on Fibonacci numbers. It's fascinating. Her next Cazimi is on like January 6th of next year. And that is also when we have some really significant planetary geometry as well, just as significant as this. And that involves Jupiter and all the planets being in a straight line with the sun. So it's crazy that we have Venus Cazimi right now, basically. And then, yeah, effectively right now, and we have this planetary geometry active. And then with the next Venus Cazimi, we also have some very significant planetary geometry. That's around January 6th to the 10th of next year. So that's like a long-range 6-month forecast for all of you, or 9-month forecast for all of you that are watching right now. But I'll do more proper analysis on that later. But this, according to J.H. Nelson, it's Mercury that's the trigger planet. When it sweeps through and activates a configuration, that's when you get the disturbance. And again, if we go back here, we see Mercury sweeping through right now with its inferior conjunction. So this is pretty wild how the planetary geometry can be used to, at least in this one instance, right? N equals 1 for me, if you read his book, Cosmic Patterns, is way more than N equals 1. But for me, using this method, N equals 1, but it nailed it right on. 3,033 viewers right now. Hello and welcome everyone to the live stream. I'm your host, Stefan Burns, geophysicist, space weatherman, and more. So we have a bit more data to go through. Right now, they have a forecast for a G3 storm. We can look at that really quickly one more time. Here is our G3 storm forecast according to NOAA, and it could be more than that. And the reason why I say that is because we just had this geomagnetic storm, a G2. What happens during a geomagnetic storm? Well, let us look at our electron flux to find out, because this will inform us as to the fact that this could be bigger. Our electron flux right now, if I step over here, our electron flux right now has been washed out. What are we even talking about? We have different particles. We have protons. We have electrons. They're charge carriers. The proton's positive. Electron is negative. We have these radiation belts that exist around the Earth. And in fact, let me pull that up for you right now. It's not going to take long. So you can see these radiation belts. Here we have these radiation belts that exist around the Earth. And we see that we have this big one there. This is the outer radiation belt. We also have an inner radiation belt closer to Earth, and that is proton dominant. There's that inner belt, there's the outer belt. Outer belt is electron dominant. And so you get a lot of electrons hanging out there, and they're traveling at speeds close to the speed of light, very, very quickly. And so electron doesn't have much mass, but if it's traveling really quickly, it has a lot of energy. And so their energy can go up into the mega electron volt range. An electron volt is the energy gained by an ion moving through an electric field. So if you have an electric field that goes from 0 volts to 1 volt, you have an electron move through that, you get 1 electron volt for that electron. So you need really powerful magnetic or electric fields to generate really high electron volt ratings for different ions like electrons and protons. And these electrons are moving at mega electron volt ranges, basically. It's one way to effectively measure their velocity, because the mass isn't going to change on an electron. So they're traveling closer and closer and closer to the speed of light. Well, when you get a solar storm to punch in like this, that causes all of these to precipitate down into Earth's ionosphere. Thank you, Star Stories, for the super thanks. So we get all these electrons here to actually rain down into the planet, and they charge the ionosphere, which is where we generate these electric currents that make a geomagnetic storm stronger. If we go back here, we see that our electron flux is actually really high. 10 to the 4 is not the highest that we've ever seen, but that is very high. One of the highest values that we've had in years. So we had really high electron flux. And we just had a really strong solar storm impact with the interplanetary magnetic field going to 40. Now it's really washed out and precipitated down into our ionosphere. And our ionosphere, as a result, is supercharged. Let's check this out. And as a result of that, we could have a very big geomagnetic storm from this impact that's coming in less than 24 hours. Here we have our total electron content for the ionosphere. This blob is quite abnormal. Typically, it does not show up like this. Usually, if you look at this model, it's showing just these kind of rivers at the end that travel across the globe. Instead, right now, it's just a massive amount of charge in our ionosphere. And you see this sweeping across because the Earth is rotating, right? So the sun is there. Let's say this is the sun. The Earth is rotating into view of that light. And because there's just more energy, more plasma closer to the surface in the ionosphere, we have the electron content going up. We see our scale here. The content is just clicking up, 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 up. So we have our electron content very high. When you have a solar storm impact, the electric currents that are generated in the ionosphere are what cause the magnetic field on the surface to swing up and down. And the stronger those electric currents and their pulsations, the bigger those swings are. Now, why does this matter for us here on Earth? Well, first off, we are bioelectric. So we respond to our environment electrically and magnetically. And therefore, if there's these big swings in the electric field and the magnetic field, there's changes that our body experiences. And you're more likely to notice that if you're stressed out, you're closer to your critical stress threshold, whatever that is for your health and wellness. If you have chronic health problems, you're just sensitive to these things, you may be sick, whatever. So earthing and grounding, super, super important. I have earthing and grounding boots and shoes available on the website wildfreeorganic.com. These are the best, all natural, all leather. They're like moccasins, but better. So they're excellent for helping you stay earth and grounded basically 24/7 when you're out and about and more. Other thing though, is that you have these geomagnetically induced currents that are created because the ionosphere acts like a capacitor with Earth's surface. And so you have these electric currents going through the ionosphere like this. They generate similar electric currents on Earth's surface, in the lithosphere, in the crust, just below our feet. And those will preferentially basically go to anything that's conductive. Anything that's superconductive, like metal, will then be a host to these geomagnetically induced currents, as they're called, or GICs. And ideally, it's a long conductor too, because these are long wavelength pulsations. And so what are really long, very long, high conductivity structures? Well, that's basically our power grid. So these transmission lines, right? They're hundreds of kilometers long, hundreds of miles long, thousands. And so they're perfect host for these geomagnetically induced currents, these GICs. And they can create a really big voltage. The voltage can go up to 500 volts, 1,000 volts over excess if it's a big storm. That can cause power grid failures. It can cause electrical issues, things of this nature. We just had a fire break out at the Heathrow Airport in London because of some power grid problem there. And so that knocked out the entire airport. Not saying that was from the solar storm impact yesterday. That fire started right before that impact really came in. So I don't think they're connected, but it goes to show you the effect of something happening to the power grid. The entire airport got knocked offline. Thank you for the super thanks, brother. So you can have those sort of issues during really powerful geomagnetic storms. During a geomagnetic storm, you also have greater satellite problems because satellites respond. They are basically in the ionosphere and in that low Earth orbit, such that if you have a really big geomagnetic storm come through, you can knock satellites offline. That's something that not many people are aware of, but it's an issue. So we have all of these thousands and thousands and thousands of satellites now, and you have this electron precipitation coming down from the radiation belts because that super powerful solar storm impact that we just had. We have a bigger one coming up, and then we have that coronal hole that's going to follow. That can cause deep dielectric charging. They're getting better and better at shielding away from this, but certainly there can be satellite issues from a powerful geomagnetic storm. You get more of these satellites to ablate into the atmosphere. What's going to happen as more and more satellites ablate down into the atmosphere in the ablation zone. So thank you, Susie, for the super thanks. Thank you so much. You have more conductive material now in the atmosphere. This is mostly made out of aluminum, but there's other components too. Silver, gold, platinum, whatever, right? Steel, iron, all those create ions in the atmosphere. Typically, as you go up, the density goes down. The troposphere is very dense in the atmosphere. Stratosphere is less dense. That's why if all of a sudden you open up your airplane window, you wouldn't be able to breathe. That's why you have the oxygen mask come down, right? Because there's not enough oxygen up there for us to breathe. Well, up in the ionosphere, the density is way, way, way lower. But look at all these satellites that we're putting up there. We've taken a whole bunch of heavy materials, launched them into space, and all these satellites eventually will come down. They will all collapse. Now, that's not from one single geomagnetic storm. It's just inevitable. They have lifetimes, life cycles. Eventually, they run out of fuel. They can't maintain their orbit, their velocity. They ablate down into the atmosphere. So you'll create basically a cloud of conductive material around the Earth. This can be aluminum particles like Al3+. This can be iron across Fe2+, Fe3+, whatever. You have a whole bunch of stuff. Life Force, thank you for the super thanks, bro. So the thing is that there's two problems with that. A, they'll stay as an ion, they'll stay ionized, and you'll have greater ionization of the ionosphere, which creates more powerful geomagnetic storms, which is more likely to cause these things to come down in the first place. So it's a positive feedback loop that's just going to really probably go out of control. The other thing is that a lot of those ions will recombine, and they'll recombine with oxygen because nitrogen is already bound up in our atmosphere. Oxygen is still like 22%, something like that. So they'll create aluminum oxide, iron oxide. You'll get these metal oxides that rain down very slowly to the surface. But as a result, you're going to cause ozone degradation. You're also going to just reduce the amount of oxygen that we can breathe on the planet, which is super important. We're already having oxygen percentages go down and CO2 go up. And you don't want to lock yourself in a room and just breathe CO2. You'll die, right? It's not as bad as carbon monoxide, but still, like CO2 fundamentally for humans and for life, like animal-based life, respiratory-based life, is toxic. That's why we breathe it out. We have to get rid of it. We have to respire our CO2. So not only is this going to make the ionosphere more conductive and these geomagnetic storms stronger, it's also just going to reduce the amount of oxygen that we have to survive, and it'll degrade the ozone layer even further, which protects us from ultraviolet radiation. So there's going to be more, perhaps, cancer and greater mutations of our DNA because there's more ultraviolet light coming in, and that has a lot of geophysical changes associated with that as well. So this is a big, big, big problem. Big problem. Now, if we kind of shift gears here, well, let me go back to this. So the forecast right now is for a G3 storm. What do I think it's going to be? Well, I think they're probably pretty accurate, that G3 storm, because if you look at the coronagraph, let's look at our coronagraph too, by the way. Not there, here we go. If we look at our coronagraph here, we'll see this, this storm really doesn't look too bad, right? We see it's a full halo. There is that other one I talked about that could be in there as well. The two could combine. But we've seen ejections like this, coronal mass ejections like this, much bigger. But we do have the ionosphere supercharged. So I'll say that I don't think the limit of this is a G3. I think that's probably the minimum that this will be. Based on all the factors, I think that we're probably looking at minimum a G3, and it could go up to a G4. It's a little wild to say that, but we're in equinox right now. We have the planetary geometry. We just had the solar storm impact. There's a whole bunch of stuff at play right now. So I think that we could see perhaps even a G3 plus G4 storm from this. But certainly I think G2 and I think very, very likely G3 like they forecasted. Now, one of the things that happened just yesterday was supposedly the end of Kali Yuga, which some of you are familiar with. So let's talk about this, because this kind of pertains to what we're talking about. specifically what I mentioned with the satellites. We have what's known as a Yuga cycle. And this is an idea and a belief in ancient Vedic culture. It's still researched into, and there's still more being discovered about it with Vedic astrologers. But basically, the ancient Vedics, they separated, they believed that there was a cycle of consciousness across the universe, and more specifically here with Earth, that was 24,000 years long. And that you had a spiritual age, which was like a golden age, where everyone was enlightened and there was no real problem or conflict. The world looked vastly different because it was a spiritual age. And so you didn't have people, people weren't in their ego during the Satya stage. And it's not the majority, but you see it's the longest of these ages. And then you have a mental age. This is Treta. And you have the descending mental age, and you have the ascending mental age. And so you have this cycle that descends down into low consciousness and then rises up from that into higher consciousness. And this continues for 24,000 years. You have the energy stage, which is Dwapara, right here. And then you have the Kali stage. This is Kali Yuga. So you have the Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, Satya Yuga, Kali Yuga. People have been saying that we've been in Kali Yuga for hundreds of years. Now, according to Swami Sri Yukteswar Giri, who lived from 1855 to 1936, he was the mentor of Yogananda, if you know Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi. He put the end of Kali Yuga at 500 AD because you had the collapse of the Roman Empire, the fall of the Gupta Empire, you had plagues, climate disruption. He put it at 500 AD. Going from 500 to 600 AD, those are the years that there's almost nothing in the history books as it relates to Europe, by the way. I read a book on that. There's like almost no evidence of 500 to 600 AD. Whereas right before that, you have the Romans. After that, you have the Dark Ages. That is the Dark Ages, the darkest part of the Dark Ages. He thinks that Kali Yuga ended then, and actually we started entering into Dwapara Yuga in the 1700s with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. And that makes a lot of sense. We also, though, have others, for example, Vedic astrologer Bibhu Dev Mishra, claiming that Kali Yuga ended yesterday on the equinox, basically, March 21st, 2025, based on the astrological characteristics. And we see the really incredible planetary geometry that we have right now. We see how a lot of things are shifting into different things at this moment in time. And so he has that being 2025, and there's like this 300-year kind of embryosis stage that takes us all the way to 2325 there. And then we enter into Dwapara. So he has these kind of formative zones in between the different yugas. And then we have our Satya stage up there, right? We're ascending. Both of these are basically saying that we're on the ascending phase, but the beginning of this ascending phase of consciousness. But what I find interesting is that there's this energy and then there's this material phase. And so the world is very material right now. It's also very energetic though. Like for example, we developed the atom bomb, right? The Industrial Revolution happened in here. We're starting to really learn to control energy to a greater degree. But we also see this entrapment in terms of people's minds and consciousness on what is just in the material dimension and realm, right? People focusing on money and power and building the biggest skyscrapers, and some people super focus on only how they look, and that's all that matters, right? Is the size of your muscles or the size of your breast or whatever. So there is certainly this dynamic where there's this focus on energy, but also material reality. So we're somewhere in this zone. Sri Yukteswar thinks that we are now out of Kali Yuga, but just out of it barely, 300 years. Bibhu Dev Mishra thinks that we exited Kali Yuga yesterday. But the thing that will bring both these together is that typically during the transition, that is when you have big disruptions. We see that with the astrological ages, or for example, the Metal Ages for the Greeks. They are times of great transition and change when you go from one to the other. So whether you look at this or that, we're in an age of transition right now that is pretty wild. So Kali Yuga supposedly ended yesterday. We have this big solar storm coming in, G3 forecast, potentially even more than that. And yeah, there's just a lot happening right now. Happy to support you with that. I'm your host, Stefan Burns. And let us get into, oh, that's not the one I want. I want to see if there's anything else that I have here to show you with the data. And if not, we will get into our question and answer. So you can type @Stefan Burns, and I'll see that question, and I'll pop it up on the screen. And yeah, Neptune is moving into Pisces, moving into Aries from Pisces. That's a 164-year cycle that occurs on March 30th. We have a partial solar eclipse on March 29th. This is the movement of Neptune into Aries is based on Western tropical astrology. The partial solar eclipse is just a partial solar eclipse. This is what's going to happen. These are the magnetic field changes that are happening right now. This is about 3 hours of data. So we see that we were just in this period of really strong activity, and now it's starting to subside. But again, we have this new impact coming in very soon. Is it all right to exercise during solar storms of this nature? Yeah, my experience is that I often have more energy and strength during a geomagnetic storm, but it just makes it, you have to keep in mind it's very important to stay grounded. So make sure you do your grounding before, perhaps, but definitely after. That's really important. If you do that, then you'll be grounding in general optimizes your nitrogen balance, muscle protein synthesis and breakdown, your bioelectricity and more. So if you are going to give yourself that sympathetic shock and a little bit of that acute stressor, then make sure you just do the earthing and grounding to kind of bring it all together. That's really important. And if you have something like my earthing boots, right, or my earthing shoes, which are right here, then you're going to be grounded more often in your day-to-day as you're walking around and just doing your stuff. So these are available at wildfreeorganic.com/store. More questions. Here's one. Is meditation helpful? Yeah, this is a perfect time to bring in these energies, to work with them and meditate on them. You can work on them. Like, for example, I noticed during geomagnetic storms, I get a pretty big increase in dreams. A lot of people report on that, more lucid dreams, precognition dreams, just vivid dreams, dreams you can finally remember. A lot of people have some, struggle with remembering dreams. So meditation is similar. You're entering into a similar space in terms of your brain waves, more delta and theta dominant rather than alpha and beta. And so, yeah, you can start to work with these energies with meditation. This could even be like for example, a sound healing meditation, right? I'm playing the singing bowl right now. This could be a yoga nidra meditation, or it could be just a blank mind meditation, an observation meditation where you're just listening to what's happening in your environment. A lot of different things, but that is definitely helpful, especially during these sort of events. So is saying, is it safe to sit outside? Yes, it's no problem. That's fine. Simon's asking, what about Canopy Gray in the silence? Well, we had that magnitude 4.4. These things, they take time. It could be tomorrow that it erupts. It could also be 300 years from now. We don't know. But what we're seeing with Canopy Gray are increasing seismicity going back all the way to 2005, accelerating in 2021, and then really accelerating in 2024. And this year, seismic burst, really big, and higher magnitude earthquakes, magnitude 4 earthquakes, which for that system is quite notable. So right now, it's just taking a little bit of a breather, but Papa Goon is asking, when will the solar storm arrive? They have that forecasted for the beginning of the 23rd universal time from NOAA, and later on in the day for the UK Met Office. So sometime on the 23rd universal time. If we look here, if we go to actually let's look at our real-time solar wind. Let's do that. So we go to our products and our data. The links for this are in the video description. we see that our time right now is 1900 universal. And so it could come in just like 3, 4, 5 hours or so. But NOAA has it coming in right basically at midnight on the 23rd universal time. So that morning, really early. And let's do that. Yeah. So they have this coming in just like 5 hours. Diana is asking, are there going to be earthquakes? There's always earthquakes. The question is, are they big or not? We just had 2 magnitude 6.2s. What the research shows is that earthquakes are more likely after you get a big push of energy. And they're more likely after coronal holes. And so we have that big coronal hole coming up. But during like an earthquake triggered by a coronal mass ejection directly, there's not much evidence for that. There's a lot more evidence for them occurring after a big loading phase. When you have these recurring coronal holes sweeping around the sun like this, constantly loading the earth with energy. And then when that solar energy finally pulls back, like during solar minimum or on a shorter time frame, that's when you get the earthquake to pop off. There's also lunar triggers and more. All right, I had to put someone in timeout. They were just spamming something. There's a lot of questions. Sorry, there's so many. I put Chudo in timeout. Here's a question. Can metal in your body be affected by these solar storms? And yes, because it's conductive, it's going to host these geomagnetically induced currents. And that can cause, for example, symptoms of pain. That's very common. I know that during the last big solar storm impact that we had, I was talking to my aunt. She has knee replacements, and all of a sudden she was getting sciatica. She didn't know why, and I mentioned that we had the solar storm impact and her metal implants, and all of a sudden she's like, oh, okay, yeah, it started exactly at that time. A lot of people have those experiences. So that's important. Do these coronal holes affect magma chamber filling pressure? That's an unknown. I don't know. I don't know if there's any research that's been done on this. That's difficult to track anyways, because it's not like you can drill into a magma chamber. It's all just basically done off of seismic measurements and some deep geoelectric measurements. And then they would have to actually want to track that as it relates to the sun. And there's not that many people that are cross-disciplinary like that. So that's a difficult question to answer. But what we are seeing are increased volcanic activity right now at the Big Island, with Indonesia, with Mount Etna, in Alaska, in Japan. So there does seem to be, if there's a connection with coronal holes and earthquakes, then I personally don't have any problem accepting the fact that there's a connection between the sun and coronal holes with volcanoes. But the specific dynamic, that still needs to be elucidated. But I'll look into that. There's probably some research that's been done on it, but I'm not exactly sure. So questions from Stephanie. She's asking, do you feel the energies are activating the collective Kundalini? Have you been experiencing Kundalini? Kundalini is basically, we have this flow of energy through the body. Your chakras align. You can go really in depth on this. There's been books written. But your chakras align. They facilitate this flow of energy, and you get this energy rising throughout the body. And it can cause, all of a sudden you turn the tap on, water's flowing, energy's flowing. It can cause some symptoms in the body. So in general, when you have increasing geomagnetic volatility, more stuff coming in from the sun, you're going to have more energy volatility on the planet. And that can be worked with. You can work with that through your dream space, your meditation, your yoga practice, working out like we talked about. There's a whole bunch of things, but that definitely could activate Kundalini for people. And probably more so on a collective scale, because this is a collective experience. A geomagnetic storm is something that the collective will be experiencing. People in the high latitude regions, if this is the Earth, people up here and down there will feel it more than those in the equatorial and mid-latitude regions, but everyone does experience these energies to some degree. And Pro Editor is asking, how long would solar maximum, how long is it going to take? Well, we're in solar maximum right now, and it will go till about 2027 or so. It'll be in the descending phase in 2027. So let me show you that. And I will have to adjust this right here. But if we go to our products and our data, we can look at our solar cycle progression. Not that one, this one. There we go. And not that either. Here we go. Okay, here we have our solar cycles, and we'll go back to the late 90s. And I'll need to move my mouse over here. Here's solar cycle 23, 24, 25. We see that we're more similar to 23 than 24. This is their prediction. This is 2025 right now. They have data going up to February. We'll have the March numbers at the end of March. But starting around 2026, like the end of the year, is when we start to go down. So some solar cycles actually have kind of a fairly long descending phase. Like I can show you some of these examples. If we go over here to like the 1700s and 1800s, we can see some good examples. Look at this one. It spiked really quick and then it basically just descended down. There was a little bit of plateau. You could call that solar maximum right there. This is ascending phase, maximum, descending phase. Sometimes it's a little broader, right? But this one's weaker, for example. Look over here, spiked up, started to go down. Sometimes where it oscillates a little bit, but that's quite common. It's a little less common actually to see these plateaus like we've been seeing recently. At least, this is what we've been seeing recently, but on the historic record, it's a little uncommon. So if this was our peak, we could already be basically coming down. But we've been having these double peaks recently. So I think it's likely that we get another peak in activity later this year or early 2026. I think early 2026 is when that's going to happen. Or late, like the very end of this year. But we will have to just wait and see. A lot of questions. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to get to everybody. Thank you for the super thanks. Here's one. How can this impact New Zealand, North Island? Well, you may see aurora. But North Island, you could see aurora, but I'm not exactly sure about that. You'll just have to wait and see. Check the Australian Space Weather Forecasting Center. They'll have your information. You can type in Australian Space Weather Forecasting on Google, and you'll pop up their website, and they'll give you a better forecast. Katarina saying, I love your videos. Makes it easy to understand. Thank you so much. And Wisecracker saying Autobiography of a Yogi is a good read. I agree. Jane is asking, is this why humans are acting so cray-cray recently? Yeah, I think that's one reason. When you have greater energy volatility in general, if you're not doing the work, you're going to act more unconsciously. And so you're more likely to just kind of experience these things and be more volatile as a person. Also, we have double retrograde right now. We have Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde. That's going to throw everything for a loop. And the sun just moved into Aries, right? If we use Western Tropical, based on, we just had the equinox, right? So that's all contributing to it as well. Now, Romana is asking, what do you think is going on with the sun? And what do you think is going on? You're not doing this by accident. Do you think something is up? So basically, is someone controlling the sun or something like that? What do I think about the sun? Well, it's in solar maximum. It goes through these cycles. So this isn't anything out of the ordinary necessarily. But the question could be, is there something that's driving these changes with the sun? And has there been a profound shift in those energies? For example, there is the electric universe theory, which is one theory of many for what's happening with the sun, is that the sun is driven by Birkeland currents. And to make it really simple, these are just streams of electrons from across the universe. They form these superconducting rivers, you can call them, of electricity, and that they go into the poles of the sun. And they drive the processes of the sun. The sun is like a central conduit for these Birkeland currents. If there are changes with the Birkeland currents, then there could be changes with the sun. So that's an idea, that's a possibility. But that's just one hypothesis / theory of many. So it's not the only one. There's the standard model of cosmology. which says that there's nuclear fusion happening on the inside of the sun. But the electric universe theory thinks that may not be the case. So, regardless, there's something that changes with the sun to drive the solar cycle and also the longer cycles. You have the Gleisberg cycle. You have these like 500-year-long cycles too. You have like 1,000-year-long cycles with the sun in terms of its activity. And they all superimpose upon each other, constructively, deconstructively, and more. Alex is asking, is there any estimate or any way to see when the poles are going to flip? It's a process. It takes time. It's not like all of a sudden it just happens in one day. So they are already flipping, right? Solar maximum is that flip. It takes time. Here we're looking at the field strength for the solar magnetic field at the poles across time. Going all the way back to the 1st of January, 1976. And we see that it has a strength here of about 1 Gauss. And this is solar minimum. Maximum is when the field strength in the poles goes away. So oscillates. You'll notice the field strength in the pole has been getting weaker. This was solar cycle 24 maximum. Here is solar cycle 25. And in between, after 23, the field strength was low. After 24, the field strength was low. This is 2020 right there. And now we see that we are starting to build field strength up again in the poles. So this is showing that the flip is occurring. And so based on this, it's going to take about another 3, 4, more like 4 years until we're in solar minimum. 4 or 5 years until we're in solar minimum. So there's some variability with that. It's not an exact science. Let's just keep that in mind. Raven says Governor Gavin Newsom was fully briefed on climate engineering 5 years ago and has done nothing. Well, Gavin Newsom's a clown. So let us be fully honest and transparent here. That guy is the worst governor. It's really unfortunate. I'm very sad that he's our governor. So that's my opinion, right? Everyone has one. But just disappointed as a Californian and as an American that he's our governor. Let's just say that. Bumblebee saying, I like the electric universe theory. Yeah, there's a lot to it. Makes a lot of sense. Nothing's ever going to be 100% accurate. But and then Casey's asking, any predictions on supercharged weather, earthquakes, or volcanic eruptions? Well, in general, there is research showing that after coronal holes, let's do this one. There's research showing that after coronal holes, you're more likely to have big earthquakes and more volatile weather systems, whether this is a cyclone or, for example, what we just had in the United States sweep through the southeast, like Georgia and those areas, Missouri, with tornadoes. And that effect specifically is active during the winter. They don't see that during the summer, but they do see that during the winter. So with this, but that's more with coronal holes and like these heliospheric boundary crossings and stuff. They do see some effect from a coronal mass ejection impact. There's so many different ways of expressing itself. So you can't ever just be like 1-to-1-to-1. But the way I look at it is you look to see if there's already some sort of pre-existing low pressure system developing. Then you look at the space weather. If the space weather is active and it's going to line up with that, then you can be reasonably sure to some degree that weather system is going to get amplified further. How much so? That's up for debate, right? And again, it's not always going to happen, but if you see that there's a pretty big, significant low pressure system, cyclone or big storm or something, and then also, hey, look, we're going to have a geomagnetic storm the day before that thing really gets wild, well, you're adding more energy volatility into everything. Yeah, I expect that to get bigger. And there's research on that. I've been talking about that over the past month or so. I've been talking about that for a long time, but specifically for tornadoes, I just read a whole bunch of research on that. Andreas is asking, are we close to the event? And I don't know what the event is. There's a billion different events, right? Is there some supervolcano eruption? Is there a supernova event in our nearby interstellar group, like from Betelgeuse? Is there some sort of super flare from the sun, what is the event? In terms of just, is something going to happen soon? I don't think you necessarily need an event for big things to happen here on Earth. And then Rising, thank you for the super thanks, bro. That's awesome. God bless. Then Crystal's asking, will that hole heal itself? Well, this is an area where the plasma temperature is lower, the magnetic field is open. That's one of the interesting things about the sun, is that sunspots are lower temperature as well. There are actual holes in the sun. Like, if you look through a telescope at the sun, you see a sunspot, and the sunspot's right on the limb. It's right there. You can see the indent that carves into the photosphere, the plastosphere. Thank you for the super thanks. And that is from, oh, I'm so far behind on the comments. Holy cow. From Rama, thank you for the super thanks. So there is a little bit of an interesting thing how the sun in some aspects gets cooler as you go deeper into it, which is a little bit of a paradox. We don't exactly know what's happening, but that kind of works against the idea that there's nuclear fusion happening and that's really hot inside and it gets colder outside. Instead, what we do see observationally is the corona is the hottest here, and then as you get on the surface, it's like 5,000. Here it's like a million, like Kelvin basically. Then you get on the surface, and it's like 5,000 Kelvin, and then you go deeper in, it gets colder. So it's a little bit of an odd paradox, but I'm not going to give 100%. Here's what I think because I'm still figuring it out. From Buffalo, War Pigs, what does the moon have to say during this supercharge? I haven't seen it lately. Well, the moon is out late at night. If I roll over and look at my window at 4 a.m., I'll see the moon. So we're just now passing past the third quarter phase. We have a new moon coming up on the 29th. And so it's only really visible rising above slightly before, I think, no. It's the sun, with the new moon, the sun and the moon rise at the same time. With the full moon, you have the sun rise and set, and the moon rises right afterwards. And it'll progressively will rise later and later. So yeah, right now the moon is rising before the sun in the early morning, and it's out during the day for most of the day. So if you look up, you'll be able to find the moon during the day. But it'll be like past its third quarter phase. But on the 29th, it'll be conjunct the sun. You won't see it at all. But it will partially eclipse the sun. So during that, you will. So that's what's happening. I'll keep you up to date. Again, I've been your host, Stefan Burns. And if you want to work with these energies more directly, both in a way that helps ground you, makes you healthier, but also helps you to connect to these energies and perhaps your subconscious to a little bit of a better degree, I recommend you go to my website, wildfreeorganic.com/store, and check out some spirituality, also the earthing shoes. And that is available for you. I mixed this up myself. There's a whole bunch of other things on the website there. I'll keep you up to date. We have this storm coming in at any moment now, so we can even look at our real-time solar wind. So yeah, our solar wind right now, if I scroll down, is basically back to normal conditions. So we're just waiting now on this new coronal mass ejection to come in. It could come in just hours. I think it's likely to come in probably in about 12 hours or so. That's just kind of my rough estimate. But tomorrow, that's what all the different forecasting agencies are expecting on the 23rd, sometime tomorrow. So after that, we have this big daddy right there following up. So a ton of activity. I'll keep you up to date. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Smash that like button. Send you all lots of love and light. We've been live for 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 11 seconds right now. Thank you so much. God bless and have a great day.